We'll start with James Daniels. According to Steelers Now, Alan Saunders, who spoke with James Daniels, there is no contract extension coming for the starting right guard this offseason. Instead, he will enter the final year of his 3-year, $62 million deal, I believe, 4-year, $62 million deal, something like that, this season, and then possibly negotiate next season. He has started all but 2 games since joining the Pittsburgh Steelers 3 years ago, has zero outlook that he won't start every game this season for the Pittsburgh Steelers, but there is no contract extension coming as of right now for James Daniels. I think everybody has immediate reactions to this, and people are seemingly kind of jumping the gun, looking at this saying, oh, this is the end of James Daniels. Mason McCormick is the future. That's why the Pittsburgh Steelers are not re-signing him. They're going to let him go at the end of the season. Unless I'm wrong, James Daniels is what, 26 years old? 27 years old, 27 years old. He's got plenty of NFL left in his game. He's got plenty of experience. And to be totally honest, if you look at the last 3 years of the Pittsburgh Steelers offensive line, he is hands down their best offensive lineman. Hands down, without question. Isaac Seumalo is probably a close second, but he's only been here for a year. But James Daniels is the guy that has been consistent, has improved every single season, who is, again, still very young and has plenty of career left in him. Even if you just sign him for one more contract, you get him until he's 30 years old. And, I mean, most offensive linemen still got some juice heading into their 30s. I would imagine a guy like him who's been durable, he's been, I mean, the best of ability is availability outside of 2 games last season. That's been him. I don't know. I look at James Daniels as a piece that if I'm the Pittsburgh Steelers, I'm getting a deal done. Now, I have an understanding and somewhat of a theory of why the Pittsburgh Steelers are not signing him right now. I'll dive into that in a second. First, I want to hear your reaction. News broke yesterday. No signing, no deal for James Daniels. What'd you think?
I was very surprised to see this. Like you mentioned, he's their best offensive lineman, has been their best offensive lineman for some time. Yeah. And even more surprising is how much they've invested in that this summer by going young. So you're not going to have to pay Zach Frazier outside of his rookie deal for a handful of seasons. Same thing goes Broderick Jones, who's only entering his 2nd year. And the same thing goes for a Mason McCormick, who you expect to be one of their backup swing guards potentially. And then also they're starting right tackle and Troy Fautanu. You're not going to have to pay a lot of these guys in the time period that you're going to have most of this James Daniels extension. So I was very surprised, especially with the focus that they've had on the offensive line, that they're not going to lock up their best offensive lineman going forward. But again, like I said, you have a theory, and maybe the best thing to do right now is to be a little bit patient with Omar Khan.
Yeah, I agree. And Omar's always got a plan. And maybe that plan is to move on. And I think the starting point to this theory is addressing it's Mason McCormick time. He's going to be the guy. He's the future of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Look, Mason McCormick's a 4th-round pick, and maybe he's got plenty of potential. But nobody, and I mean absolutely nobody, especially Omar Khan and especially Mike Tomlin, should be sitting around saying a 4th-round pick who did not play in the FBS, but instead the FCS, is the guy that is going to replace your best offensive lineman and a key piece to the inside in a group that has already or finally come to a place where you think that they are complete or near complete. James Daniels being replaced by Mason McCormick, maybe that does work out, but I think that there's equally, if not more of a shot that it doesn't work out. And that if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, you're taking a shot on a guy who's coming from South Dakota State, who you got to be looking at saying, for one, he's never played NFL talent. Mason McCormick's never faced the talent level that is in the NFL. That's just not what you're going to face at South Dakota State. Now you're coming here as a 4th-round rookie. You have to have zero expectations. It's the same thing as everybody else. Like, if Troy Fautanu is not getting starting reps right now, you're not thinking of Mason McCormick as the future of your program. That's just not what you're doing if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers. There's no reason to think like that right now because you have a key piece to the puzzle. Do I think Mason McCormick has a future in Pittsburgh? Absolutely. If I had to guess, that future is playing left guard behind Isaac Seumalo and eventually replacing Isaac Seumalo, who chances are retires in 2 years when Mason McCormick is ready to start in the NFL. in year 2 of his career. I don't know if I'm banking on that, especially right now, that he's going to be ready and prepared. And that's the reason that the Pittsburgh Steelers are not looking to re-sign James Daniels. What I do believe, where I do stand with the Pittsburgh Steelers and feel that this is the right move and a risk, but a risk worth taking, is you look at the contracts for guards this offseason. They are massive. Massive. I mean, Robert Hunt signed a 5-year, $100 million deal with $63 million guaranteed. I mean, what was Kevin Dotson was unheard of as well. He had over $40 million guaranteed, something like that. You look at these guys, you look at the market for guards in the NFL right now. It's not a place you want to be if you're an owner. It's not a place you want to be if you're a general manager or head coach. You don't want to have those negotiations, especially with the 27-year-old who's been consistent, who's been a key to your offensive building block along the offensive line. James Daniels is signing for a ton of money if you ink him to a deal this offseason. And quite frankly, the Pittsburgh Steelers have way too many questions about their future and about who else gets contract extensions to look at this and say James Daniels is the guy we're going to sign right now. I don't think that they're going to have contract negotiations with Pat Freiermuth. I don't think that they're going to have contract negotiations with Najee Harris. I don't think that they're going to have contract extensions with, I mean, I guess they're talking to Cam Hayward, but I was shocked about the Cam Hayward thing. I thought that would happen next year, depending on how well he played this year. Larry Ogunjobi's the same way. You could probably look at a Landon Roberts and say the same thing. There are all these guys that need to be re-signed over the next year, maybe 2 years. The Pittsburgh Steelers are not going to sit down and sign any of them. You want to know why? Because they got to figure out the quarterback position in a year. So what are they going to do? They're going to sit around. They're going to hope and pray that the guard market goes down in a year, that these guys are not signing $100 million deals, that instead they're signing $75 million deals, $80 million deals. And James Daniels gets a deal that's, I don't know, 17, 16, maybe $15 million a season instead of 20, because I think that's where they're headed right now. And a guy like that with so much potential is a guy that's going to get a massive paycheck. I don't think the Steelers are looking to do that. I think they're hoping that it goes down. That being said, I have a very hard time believing that the Pittsburgh Steelers are moving on from James Daniels, a 27-year-old, because of a 4th-round pick, and really because of anything, because you got to look at it and say, this team is ready and finally has an offensive line. Why did they spend all that time just to kind of throw it away with their best offensive lineman right now? Just doesn't make sense. Am I crazy to think that a year from now a deal could get done and that the Steelers are just kind of waiting it out?
No, I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. The only question I have with that is, that's a lot of hope. I mean, you're hoping that the market subsides. You're hoping that James Daniels isn't at the top of that market, because let's not lie here. The Steelers are going to be a run-first team. And if James Daniels is the top offensive lineman on a team that's running for, 200 yards every once in a while, more often than not, he's going to get a major contract. So the odds that that contract gets lower and that number gets lower, to me, it's a risk. And I think that taking that risk with a guy that's like Pat Freiermuth, where even in an offense that succeeds, he might not be the top factor, whereas James Daniels might be the top factor on an offensive line that's going to be heavily featured this season by Arthur Smith and his offense. That's the one thing that would concern me is you're rolling the dice on an offensive lineman that could end up costing you more money, and you might have to lose him anyway because you can't afford him.
I don't disagree with that. I don't disagree with that. I think the Steelers should understand that, should have a full expectation that James Daniels' price tag could be way out of the realm of possibilities a year from now. But I also think that as important as James Daniels is, you're not looking to tie yourself down and hurt yourself in other markets with other players, especially the quarterback position, because of a left guard. And I like this question from Sir Schwartz here. Why aren't people talking about Spencer Anderson? I think that is a very big sleeper in the conversation here. Spencer Anderson has played exclusively guard and center during OTAs this year. If the Steelers are looking at him, they liked him last year. They liked him a lot a year ago. And he's a 7th-round pick. I get that. But if you have two guys, if you have Mason McCormick and Spencer Anderson, you at least get an opportunity to see what you have. And don't get me wrong, I don't think either of them are a reason to move on from James Daniels. But if you're going to tie yourself down to a position, it's not going to be right guard. And if you find yourself in a year saying we can't afford James Daniels, you have two options. Whereas if you do it right now and say one of those options, say Spencer Anderson, because I think that's a better, I think if you're going to talk about what's a more realistic thing to happen, Spencer Anderson taking over as a starter a year from now seems more realistic than Mason McCormick. If you're going to talk about that, I think that at least gives you flexibility. It's not perfect. I think you should re-sign James Daniels. I 100% think you should re-sign James Daniels. In 2 years, move on from Isaac Seumalo, make Mason McCormick your starter and Spencer Anderson your backup. But I don't think you tie yourself down to a guard. I just don't think it happens. And a year from now, I think contract extensions get talked about, but you could be right. He could price himself right out of Pittsburgh. And I think he's got a fair opportunity to price himself right out of Pittsburgh. And I'm always rooting for players and paychecks. So go price yourself out of Pittsburgh, man. I think James Daniels is a good dude. He's a big locker room guy, great leader on the offensive line. I don't know. I look at him and say he's a dude that's probably gone in a year, but it makes sense for the Pittsburgh Steelers to not negotiate right now because, quite frankly, you're not going to pay a right guard when you have options. And I don't think those options are great. And at the same time, you have to figure out a quarterback position. Ties yourself down just way, way too much.